Is Chevy really surprised that the Jets are actually struggling this year? Let's talk about that.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support, especially as you have now helped make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcasting network. Tonight's episode, I want to chat about a Winnipeg Free Press article from Mike McIntyre that came out yesterday. The Jets have given an interview. Cheveldayoff with Mike sat down and talked about this season's struggles. And let's just say that I came away kind of feeling a little irritated by it. Now, listen, right? We all know Chevy's usually the kind of guy who's very cagey, coy. He doesn't really give a lot of clear answers in the usual sense. You're never really going to know his plans or full insights, but I'll tell you this, right? Some of the comments that were coming out of this interview and some of the ways that I think the interview was described give me some real cause for concern. This Jets team appears to be a little bit blindsided by how rough things have been. And I have to say, I don't know how that's possible. If we are talking about a multi-million-dollar front office managing a professional NHL sports team like the Winnipeg Jets, the fact that their offseason gamble, which a lot of fans thought wasn't going to necessarily work, isn't working, and that's a surprise, to me should be sending a lot of red flags and ringing a lot of alarm bells. That should not be what we're hearing from this front office. And if you're hoping for help to be on the horizon, may not be coming anytime soon. Want to chat about that, preview Wednesday's game against the Montreal Canadiens, and also talk a little bit about how all of this kind of factors into the youth movement that appears to be up and down with this team. Before we dive into all that, though, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. So, Jets have obviously come out of the gates stumbling a bit, and injuries have been a factor. No one's going to deny that. But at this point, I think we can start to stop talking about that. I think we are funny way of saying that. Start to stop talking about that, right? I think we're at the point of the year where like injury excuses only get you so far. If anything, I think the injuries have just served to highlight where this team was vulnerable and how, ultimately the decisions that were made this past summer have kind of come to bite the Jets in the butt. Now, before we dive into the not happy things, here's the piece of good news. All of the free agents that the Jets brought in, all of the older players, were all just signed to one-year deals. It's why I initially wondered if the Jets were maybe looking at the season and not feeling fully ready to commit. But by the same token, Chevy seems to feel like the free agents that he brought in were going to perform a lot better than they have. Taves has kind of been a bit of a bust. JT is trying his hardest, and you see him hustling and working hard, but he cannot keep up defensively, and that part of his game has been bad enough to where any of the minimal offensive production that he's able to bring kind of gets washed out. He's not really able to do that much. You already see him on the fourth line where he probably should have been to start the year, and I mean, it just is what it is, right? You were taking a gamble on a player who hasn't been in an NHL rink in 2 years and had, long COVID, had, an Ayurvedic treatment rehab process to try and get himself back into shape. And I think the fact that he's able to skate is pretty amazing. But in terms of where the league is now and what he's able to do, he just has not really been a player that's been worth, upwards of $6 million that he's going to be paid in bonuses, $5 to $6 million, right? Unfortunately, that's just where his game is at. And I'm sure he probably has felt frustrated that he's not been able to get his body into the kind of shape that he needs to be for a top end player. But, he's 37, right? And not many late 30s guys are performing at a high elite level in this league. You can probably count the number on like two hands, maybe one. So I don't know that it's necessarily something I'm going to hang on him so much as it is on the Jets front office for thinking that this was going to be their answer to the 2C problem and then looking at Nyquist as their Ehlers replacement. None of these guys could really be that kind of level of player. Ehlers is doing pretty well in Carolina right now and has started to find his scoring feet. Meanwhile, the Jets offense has basically been one line. So great, awesome, great plan. Cole Koepke and of course Tanner Pearson have kind of filtered into the bottom six. Pearson has been just bad, if we're being honest. He's a nice guy, and certainly if this was Pearson like 6-7 years ago, I would have been thrilled. Like, Tanner Pearson used to be a super underrated player for the Kings. I was always a big fan of his, and you just see him not be that guy right now, not into his 30s. Koepke has been fine. I thought he's a really nice energy fourth liner. But again, right, we're talking about replacing Ehlers. No one here is replacing Ehlers. This team added, a lot of depth players to a team that already has a lot of depth players. And when you hear Brad Lambert getting frustrated at the lack of offensive spots for him, you see Trubakov, struggling to make an impact and getting sent down to Salomonson coming up thanks to injury and getting benched after 2 games. I just don't really understand what the plan is. And I think the fact that, Chevy is surprised at all by what's happened is stunning to me, because I think a lot of people who had a crystal ball or didn't have a crystal ball, I didn't need one, we could see that this was a real scenario that was possible. Did I expect it to be this bad? I don't know if I was thinking it was going to look like this, but I did think this was a potential scenario. None of these guys are elite offensive players anymore. Gus and Taves maybe had the best chances, and that was asking a lot of both players. I don't even think Nyquist has been that bad, although recently he's had some really horror show moments and decisions, but otherwise I think he's been fine. He's still not really scoring any goals. Taves hasn't really done much offensively, 3 goals so far and like 9 or 10 points total. Not great. Not great. And there are 4 players in that group of 12 forwards that you ice every night. So all this to say, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know how anyone could have looked at this summer and thought that this Jets team was going to be the same as last year's team. It might look similar on paper, but I can tell you, anyone who really thought about the acquisitions and how all of them sort of fit into this overall scheme of this team just probably thought the same thing that I did, which was it's not going to be a good team. It's just not. And I think Winnipeg is starting to realize that the only way that they can fix things is externally. And there's no one really who's selling out there right now except maybe the Blues, maybe the Preds. And I have a feeling that the number of sellers this year is not going to be favorable for the Jets. So, it might not even be worth buying this season. And if that's the case, well, let's just hope that Winnipeg ends up with a higher draft pick, because I think that's really the only way that this season comes out with a big success if they don't make the playoffs. They need a big draft asset to help this team over the next couple of seasons. That's the kind of piece that you can trade for help. Or if you think about, the future of this team and where the squad's likely heading, you can start to think about integrating that piece into your more immediate future. So lots for the Jets to figure out, but all I can say is I really hope this wasn't actually a surprise and that Chevy was not being entirely forthright about how he thought the season might go. Curious to get your thoughts, though. Do you really think he was shocked by the results so far, or do you think this was something that's just one of those, it was on their scenario cards, just more on the lower likelihood outcome standing? So curious to get your thoughts. How do you think he's done so far? What do you think of Chevy's performance? Do you think it's time for a change? Drop your thoughts below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. The season, though, still underway for the Jets. They are still having to scrap for every point, and now they face the Montreal Canadiens. Let's see how the Habs are lining up in just a brief moment. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. If you're looking at some of this week's NFL games, there are some great opportunities to think about who might be on the winning end of some very close matchups. We've got on Thursday, Miami versus New York. Now, listen, right? The Jets are definitely the underdogs in this game, but, they do still have a decent defense. And if their offense can figure out some way to get past a Miami secondary that hasn't exactly been elite and maybe gets to Tua a little bit, put them under some pressure, this could be a bit of a surprise upset. Of course, it's probably going to be a fairly low scoring affair, so I wouldn't expect that over a 41.5 total points to really come into effect, but maybe Miami goes ham against this Jets secondary. Either way, though, the only way that you can profit and get in on the action is by visiting FanDuel.com right now and place your live NFL bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and you can too. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcasting network. Thanks for rejoining us as we're chatting about Winnipeg versus Montreal. Just a note that this episode is being recorded a couple days in advance of this game. I have a work conference on Tuesday, so, for the next couple of days, actually. So I will have recaps of Buffalo and Montreal probably later this week. I would say Wednesday we'll talk about the Sabres game, and maybe Thursday we'll talk about this Montreal game. But Montreal, right? Let's talk about the Habs, right? They are third in the Atlantic, and they are doing okay. Their recent form has kind of been a little up and down, and some of the games that they've played recently, they've conceded quite a few goals. Colorado just ripped them a new one, 7-2. But they've also beaten Utah and Vegas, so they've been taking care of business against some of the, I would say, mid-tier Western teams, but against top contenders. I think Montreal is one of those squads where you're not entirely shocked when they concede like 5 goals against a cup contender. This team is still piecing together their core, but they're getting better, right? They're getting more and more fun. They're starting to find some real footing here, although this past November wasn't exactly the best month for them. They had quite a few humbling defeats to teams like LA, Dallas, and Washington. But again, I think that there are some, signs of really exciting thing. Lane Hudson continues to be fun. Suzuki has developed into a really good top 6 center. Demidov is crazy fun to watch. There's a lot that I think they're happy with. Noah Dobson has been a great trade for their back end. They are starting to find their footing, and this core, I think, is really just coming together. In net, I think, is maybe where you'd have some concern. Dobish and Montembeault, maybe not the most elite 1-2 punch of goaltending solutions, so that is going to be a little bit of a question going forward. But they're fun, they're young, and they're fast, and I think that makes this a very bad challenge for the Jets. This team, I think, is going to put Winnipeg under a lot of pressure. Every game against Montreal has always been very, back and forth already. And now you have a faster, younger team against an old, slow Jets team on the road. Doesn't really promise great things for Winnipeg. Up front, you've got Caulfield, Suzuki, and Bolduc. Then your second line is Slavkovsky, Kapanen, and Demidov. Third, Tessier, who just signed, Evans and Anderson. And on the fourth, Shekai, Veleno, and Gallagher. This group is going to be, very fast. There's not a lot of crazy elite skill in the bottom 6, but their top 6, they've got quite a bit of finishing talent. And I think this is where, the Jets' top line is going to have to, again, carry the load. The Lowry line, I think, is really going to have to try and figure out a way to win the battles against this bottom 6 almost by themselves. And I just don't feel like that's going to be quite enough. Montreal, in many ways, I think, is putting together a fast, fun core, but the back end is still a little bit of a work in progress. On the top pair, you've got Matheson and Dobson. I think Matheson just signed a big extension, and I'm not quite sure that I would have done that. But then on the second pairing, they've got Engstrom and Hudson, and on the third, Shakai and Carrier. I think if there's anything that's particularly scary for this team, it's that, they're going to have to rely on Dobish and Montembeault, and I think that's maybe where Winnipeg has a bit of an advantage. Milic and Comrie probably have, I'd say relatively comparable expectations, but I would trust Milic a bit. He did really well against Carolina despite the scoreline, and if he gets another game here this week, maybe the Montreal game would be worth putting him out against. I thought he was fast and reactive against Carolina, and, this Habs team is going to be pulling off a lot of cross-lot passes, really quick odd man rushes. As much as I like Comrie, I don't know if that's the game that I would necessarily trust him with, especially with how Milic looked in his first NHL game. So we'll have to wait and see how they split this. If Comrie goes on Monday, maybe they have Milic on Wednesday, or maybe they just go with Comrie for both games. Either way, though, I think that this game is probably not going to be in Winnipeg's favor. Montreal may be very leaky on the back end, and that has certainly led to quite a few goals against. But offensively, they're scoring like 80-plus goals. Their productivity up front has been enough to paper over some of the lack of support on the back end. And I think for the Jets, that's a bit of a mismatch. Winnipeg's offense hasn't quite been as high-flying as this Habs team is. And sure, Montreal may have had some recent struggles in November, but December's a new chance for them. And after Winnipeg's recent struggles themselves, I don't really see this being a particularly great matchup for Winnipeg. But curious to know how you feel about this one. If I'm going to do predictions again, I guess I'm feeling like this is going to be a 4-2 or 4-3 loss for the Jets. Would be curious to get your thoughts on this one. I don't want to call this a benchmark game because it's not, but I think this is kind of instructive for the Jets to see what the Winnipeg's future should look like. This team is going to be faster. They're going to be a very, quick counter squad with a lot of pace up and down the flanks. And you look at how they've sort of integrated their youth. Yeah, the Jets are a more veteran team and, obviously won a President's Trophy last year. But look at how young this Montreal squad is. Look at where they're putting their kids in. I think the Jets need to take some lessons here. And listen, like the Jets don't have, a Demidov or a Slavkovsky or a Caulfield necessarily, but Lambert might actually make a real impact on your forward scoring right now. Winnipeg's offense, as it is, has been completely stagnant. Maybe call up one of the faster kids, one of the ones who's actually able to create anything at all. Find somebody in this Moose squad that can give you some goal-scoring ability. It's not like the veterans outside of the top line have really been chipping in much of anything, and that even includes Cole Perfetti. I think Perfetti's been doing a lot of the right things, but it's not like he's really been lighting the lamp all that frequently. Just one goal in the past couple of games. This is a chance maybe to bring in some kids. I've talked a lot about that over the past couple of years. But I think at this point, there's really no excuse not to see if you can get something, a little more support for your Jets offense, right? Saying that you have to rely on what's already there just doesn't cut it anymore. I don't think that this team is capable of getting it done with the existing roster. And against a Habs team that's fast, quick, and high scoring, yeah, Winnipeg could find itself in a very early hole. So at least find a way to punch back as much as you can. But curious to know if you agree with that assessment or if you think at this point there's no real benefit to doing so. Drop your thoughts and score predictions below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. Speaking of the youth, I do want to chat about the kids because I feel like Winnipeg is not really committing to the whole youth thing, and I think that is a genuine mistake. We'll chat about why coming right up. When I'm hydrated, everything just works better. My focus, my energy, mood, even my skin. That's why I've been using DripDrop. It's doctor-developed hydration that keeps me running at full power no matter what my day looks like. DripDrop isn't your average sports drink either. It delivers 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading brands, using a science-backed formula trusted by medical professionals, firefighters, and over 90% of top college and pro teams. As somebody who likes to lift weights, obviously when I'm benching, I'm going to be sweating a lot. It's intense work. And DripDrop is there to pick me up when I need it. It's hydration without all the sugar and the crashing. And especially the crashing part. We all know that if you have a very sugary hydration solution, it's really bad when you start to feel those cramps and those sugar crashes. The energy boost initially is great, but it doesn't last. DripDrop avoids all of that and still tastes amazing no matter what. And hydration for me, it's non-negotiable. DripDrop has been a great solution, and I highly recommend it myself. Right now, DripDrop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to DripDrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. That's DripDrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard, and keep your body and mind performing at their best with DripDrop. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Thanks for rejoining us on tonight's show as we're just chatting about the Winnipeg Jets youth movement, or perhaps their lack of. And, I know we've seen more rookies this year. We've seen some kids cycle in and out. Most of them have been sent back to the Moose. And I get it, right? There are limited roster spots, and the Jets filled up a lot of the lineup positions with veterans. At this point, though, you need to call up one of the kids. This Jets offense is it's stagnant. It needs a spark. And, you have 3 or 4 guys who have 0 goals in the last 15 games. That's really not good enough. I love this team. I've enjoyed watching them over the years. And this might be one of the most anemic goal-scoring outfits I've ever seen from Winnipeg. This team is just not very good, and it needs some finishing talent. Those finishers are going to come with some real warts from the Moose, right? Lambert, I think, is still a little too fast for his own good, but he skates like the wind. He's had some really interesting flashes and sparks, especially in his final couple of games. And technically, he is still one of the highest 5v5 rate scorers thanks to his 1 goal in 4 games. So, there's a fun little statistical anomaly for you, thanks to small sample sizes. But I think the general message is the same, right? The Jets need to figure out what they have with some of these kids. And in that article I referenced with Mike McIntyre, Chevy still said Lambert was part of the Jets' future. Now, my guess is that probably is more in a trade, but you have to build up that trade value. You can't just throw him out there and expect somebody to be really enamored with a guy who has 1 goal in 4 NHL games and hasn't exactly been shredding the AHL recently. You got to figure out a way to give him some sort of success and track record so you can actually trade him for something halfway decent. And for Winnipeg, they frankly just need offensive support. I also think, recalling Lambert and putting him in might actually give you more credence to the idea that you're actually playing some of the kids. I look at the Salamonson thing, and I was just completely baffled that after, you had him promoted to the top pairing, you benched him against Nashville. Yes, it technically worked because, Schenn had a couple of assists, but it wasn't like Schenn was that great defensively. We saw lots of turnovers from him on that third pairing. At the end of the day, I don't know what message it sends to Winnipeg's so-called important youth when you have a couple of games where you start to look more and more confident, you start to put together 2 and 2, you look more and more like a real NHLer, and you get benched in your third opportunity. I feel like it leads too much credence to the idea that the Jets don't actually give their youth chances to really soar. And every other team in the NHL is not going that direction. Lots of squads out there are putting kids in and leaning on them. And yes, it does come with serious risks. No one is going to pretend that it doesn't. But it's not like the existing core for the Jets is really that impressive right now. They've done an okay job, and some of the Jets star players have, in my mind, really stood on their head. But if you're hearing from guys like Gabriel Velarde that they're frustrated that no one else on this team can score, then find somebody who can do it. And if you don't want to trade for somebody out there because no one is selling, then look internally. your existing veteran group needs to be challenged. They need the push. You can't just keep putting the same lineup out there every night, playing them the same amount of minutes, and expecting something different to change. Maybe they suddenly find the back of the net a couple more times, but I think what we're seeing out of this Jets team is what we're probably going to see in a few months. And unless there's a big shakeup or, suddenly somebody turns into like their 10-year previous version of themselves, I think Winnipeg is just offensively capped this season. And so this is the best opportunity you've ever had to see if your youth can really be a difference maker. Braden Yeager kind of seems like he might be ready. Third goal of the season for the Moose already. He's been, bounced up and down the lineup, hasn't complained one moment from what I know, and he looks to be a really good player for Manitoba. Maybe give him a shot with the Jets. What do you have to lose at this point? Winnipeg isn't getting much elsewhere. See if one of these kids can actually rise up and do something. And if they can't, then send them back to the Moose. They are waiver exempt. It's fine. But you have to do something to try and give this team a real spark. And maybe calling upon the kids that you've so-called drafted and developed might be the chance to not only give yourself some real support that you actually do give a pathway to young players, but it also gives you a chance to figure out what you need when the trade deadline comes around. It's a shocking concept, I know, but it'd be great if the Jets could actually follow through with this thing at least one point or another. It can't just be through injuries every time. The injury thing, yes, it is the most clear pathway for most prospects to make the NHL, but the Jets, you understand my frustration. You've heard me talk about it. I know a lot of you are starting to feel the same way. This season is slipping out of reach, and it feels like Winnipeg is continually putting itself at a disadvantage when it could at least do that with some level of flair and excitement. Give fans something to watch. Give this team some sort of a spark. Push the veterans. Give them some outside competition to deal with. Show them that, this is a meritocracy, and what you have is not guaranteed every single game, night in and night out. But let me know your thoughts on this. Do you agree with this approach? Do you think the Jets should just go with what they've got and hope for the best? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.